Good evening, everyone. I'm Victoria Lambert. I'm Education and Careers Editor at the Telegraph. And this is the second session in our series Back to School, How to Help Your Child Catch Up in Association with Pearson. As a provider of learning resources and qualifications, Pearson has been working hard to develop new resources to support learning at home. For more information, please take a look at the handout available on the right-hand side of your screen now. Today, we'll be looking at years 6 to 7. My first panellist is Victoria Hearn. Victoria is the principal of Impington Village College, which was named State School of the Year East Anglia in 2020. Her commitment to high quality education has led her to be one of the youngest secondary school principals in the country. Good evening, Victoria.
Hello, good evening.
Also joining me is Isla Billett. Isla has over 12 years experience at Pearson, currently working as the Intervention Transformation Lead for UK schools. Isla has been driving Pearson's focus throughout this particular time on catch-up and new initiatives for intervention. So, hello, Isla.
Hello.
So to begin with, I'm going to go to Isla first. And Sean Watts has sent a question in to say, are there any free resources that we can access that will help my child with their SATs, preferably previous papers and such like?
Yes, there certainly are, and there's lots of resources available online to support with practice for SATs, but also to really help children build confidence. And you can access past papers on a government website. I think we're just going to add the link to the chat so you can have a look at those. And I would also recommend do speak to your child's school about the resources they're using, and they can recommend as well any good resources they've come across. But there are plenty out there, so lots of variety as well to suit your child.
Is that something you do, Victoria? Do you have favourite things to recommend for SATs?
So obviously we're secondary, so
they come through.
Take students through. We do use a variety of materials. Exam preparation is obviously a big part of what we're doing with students. There are lots and lots of resources out there on exam board websites, but also things like BBC Bite Size, and I would be expecting teachers to be providing students with example questions both in lessons and also to be doing at home.
Yeah. Our next question comes from Lucy, and this is for you, Victoria. How repetitive is the curriculum once they come into year 7? Will lessons that my children has missed be repeated, or should we be addressing gaps at home? So I think she's worried that she's got a year 6 child who's missed a lot of school. Should she be somehow trying to make up those gaps, or is this going to be brought together when they get into year 7?
So there are a couple of things to pick up on here. I think, first of all, the secondary curriculum is sometimes repetitive. So students might do something in a particular way one year and then build on that by revisiting it the next year. But there will also be new material brought in along the way. It's worth bearing in mind that in schools and particularly in secondary school, we've spent a huge amount of time during the lockdown really thinking about what students might have missed and any gaps that there might be in their learning. And certainly our expectation would not be that the onus is on the parent at all to help those students catch up. Actually, I would say that's very much our responsibility. And I think if your child is starting year 7, particularly, the most important thing for them is to actually settle into the life of the school and trust that teachers will have worked really hard to think about what specific areas of the curriculum those students might have missed, that they might need support with catching up on. Trust that they will be doing things like diagnostic tests before they might start teaching a particular unit to see what students know and what they don't know, and addressing those gaps. And that actually, if we can just get the students in a really positive place and keen to come to school every day, actually I think that's probably what the priority should be, rather than worrying about catching up specific things at home, because it's worth bearing in mind, and I think we'll come to this quite a few times tonight, that actually all of the children are in the same boat. Yeah. Children have all been away from school for a relatively short amount of time. I know it doesn't seem like it, but actually with the summer holidays and half term and the Easter holidays, actually that amount of learning time compared to their whole school career is quite small. And they're very resilient
And in your experience, the children you've already had your New Year sevens for 3 or 4 weeks now, haven't you? 3 weeks. Yeah. Are you seeing children who are struggling and feeling like they're behind, or are you seeing children who are actually just getting back on with life?
No, we are seeing children who are genuinely delighted to be here. I would say the vast majority of our students are super excited to walk through the door. I think year 7 in particular, talking to them, I was on lunch duty today and I was talking to quite a few of them. Actually, they are loving being back in the school environment. And despite everybody's worries about transition, I think the things that we did virtually and the nature of young people who I think are very resilient actually means that they're fine. And they're just genuinely really happy to be here and enjoying as much of the normality as we can possibly give them.
That's really reassuring, actually. So the next question I've got is from Tony Sherburn, and I think this one's for you, Isla. What's the best form of daily practice, apart from times tables, to make sure students don't forget what they're learning?
Well, I think there's many possible sort of answers to this question, as I think lots of different approaches and techniques are likely to suit different learners. So I think it's really important for students to understand what best suits them, and that might be different approaches to learning. So it might be sort of reading aloud, having discussions, talking back through what they've learned in the day. But it could also be about the environment they're learning in, so the time of day, the sort of setup they've got at home. And I think there are sort of lots of different learning techniques, but also, and hearing Victoria speak, that the enjoyment of learning I think is really important here as well. And how much a learner's motivated by a topic can really help. And if they can relate that to sort of everyday context and really understand why it's relevant, I think that can really help things to stick as well. And people often speak as well about being consistent between home and school, and how that can be really effective for helping to really sort of remember what's learning. So I would recommend finding out the sort of techniques used in school. So for practice at home, it's sort of a similar and consistent approach, which can really help.
Yeah. Our next question, I'm going to bring this one back to Victoria. This is, my child is facing a lot of tests at the new secondary school, and she's found these to be very overwhelming. What can I do to help? I mean, I think, guess what kind of questions, what kind of tests would they be? I think would be the first thing.
So, I think one of the things to pick up on is the language around the test. We try really hard to not use the word test with our students. We do lots of assessments. They do lots of little tests, quizzes and things in class. They might do pieces of written work, like a paragraph, or they might do an essay. But actually, that's just part of the ongoing learning. And I think sometimes when we refer a lot to the test in schools, students will, and it's one of the worst possible things I think as a teacher, when a student says, "Miss, is this going to be on the test?"
Yeah.
Because actually we want them to learn the things that we want them to learn, because they're part of the curriculum and because we've chosen those things really carefully. And actually I think talking to the students about the purpose of the testing, so this is just a way of finding out where they're at, what gaps there might be, so that we can help them to get better, it really helps. And actually I think looking at them when they've come back, identifying some of the things that have gone really well and picking up on those things, and looking at maybe what they did the time before and how much progress they've made, and focusing on that journey rather than being preoccupied with I've got a test, that actually that kind of ongoing assessment of students is normal, but it's just about how we talk to the young people about it, and to try and move away from this idea of it's a test and I must get 100% to how can I show off what I know, and how can I use this as an opportunity to show my teacher what I need help with. Okay.
And so from the mum's perspective, should she be trying to stop using those words at home as well?
Yeah, I think so. And that focusing on, look how much better you've done this time, or look, I can see that you worked really hard on this particular thing and that's really paid off because the test has gone well. I think that will help. Also, I think if it is a real cause for concern, speaking to the school and saying that this is something that's causing a lot of anxiety, because it might just be that teacher saying to that particular student, actually, yes, we're calling this a test, but really this is just for me to see how you're getting on and see how effective my teaching has been, as opposed to see how good you are. And I think sometimes students get very hung up on this idea that the test is to tell me whether I'm good or bad, as opposed to help us identify what needs to come next.
Do you think?
I think that's a really good point.
Yeah. Do you think there's also a feeling there that that as a parent, you're putting you and the child are putting all your worries around the tests, and actually what you're worried about is something else. It's actually the more general fear of going back to school, getting older, coping with your new environment.
Yep, quite possibly. And it is a bit of an adjustment sometimes, because I think students go obviously from having like predominantly one teacher or a couple of teachers in a primary setting to going into a secondary school where they might have 10 or 15 teachers because of all the different subjects that they're doing. Building those relationships with those individual teachers and the different personalities can make that quite tough. Yeah,
I can imagine. I'm going to put the next question back to you as well, Victoria. Katie says, how do you assist a child who may have autistic traits and has struggled with communication online during lockdown and is now joining Year 7?
So I would say certainly contact the school. If you haven't already, contact the school, speak to the SENCO or the person responsible for transition. I would suspect if your child has got autistic traits, that's something that might have been picked up in the primary school, and so the secondary might already be aware of that. But if they're not, certainly contact them, get some advice, and look at what support the school can put in place, because I think that's probably a very individualised circumstance, and I think the school will definitely be able to help.
Well, that's reassuring. And I think the next question is for you too. It's from Fiona, and she says, how do I know which areas my child is needing to catch up in, and how do I prioritise?
So I'm assuming that this is also new Year 7.
Yeah.
Again, I think coming back to what we were saying earlier, this idea of settling into the new school, I think is first and foremost the most important thing. The school will be working really hard to work out what your child knows and what your child needs help with, and will be doing their best to address those gaps. You will, over the course of the next term, I am sure, get feedback from the school, either through your child's exercise books and work that's been marked, which is a kind of quite informal way of getting feedback, but also then through reports and progress checks. And I think looking at those, try not to get too hung up on this idea of catching up. Students will catch up over time, and I think what we need to do is really reassure them that that's going to be the case. And I think if you've got specific concerns, again, talk to the school, either contact the person responsible for transition or progress in the school, or your child's form tutor in the first instance is usually a good port of call. I think if that's something that you're really concerned about, and I think particularly if that's having an impact on your child, then definitely raise that.
Cara Curtis has a question, which I think is one for you, Isla. How important are SATs results for the next stage, so secondary school? I have heard they're used to stream kids in Year 7, and I'm worried my son will be disadvantaged due to lessons missed in lockdown. So would that be taken into account when they're assessing the results?
So in the summer term of Year 6, so all pupils in England usually take national assessments, which we call SATs, in English and maths. Now, they're designed to measure the progress a child has made within the school, and they really then help to alert teachers and the school if there's any areas of extra support the child might need. And they also have a real purpose for the school in terms of them being able to measure their progress and to sort of set targets. So they have lots of purposes. Now, secondary schools may use SATs as part of their decision making when it comes to grouping children into sets or to different streams, but they also commonly use their own sort of assessments as well. So Victoria was talking a bit earlier about assessments for Year 7 when they come in, to really help understand where those learners are. And one of the reasons for that is that SATs focus on English and maths and particular skills, so a school may want to do that sort of broader understanding of where learners are. So SATs were cancelled nationally, so all secondary schools are facing the same challenge in terms of the information that they have available. So most are likely to be using baseline assessments and their own sort of tests that we've spoken about to really help understand where learners are and what support they need. And as perhaps if it's a sort of small school, or if they have good connections with primary schools, there may be a bit of understanding from a qualitative sense as well, so speaking to schools and finding out a bit more about pupils, sort of similar to what happens for reception children. And I think it's worth remembering as well the sort of purpose of streaming is around making sure that learners have got the right support that they need to really help them to progress at the pace that's right for them. And if you do have any specific concerns or questions about how secondary schools are using assessments, then it's worth sort of picking up with your children's teacher and just sort of asking those questions to get that reassurance.
Because it's not a punishment, is it? We're not the children aren't.
No, exactly.
Put in the lower stream just because they didn't do well.
No, quite. And it's about assessing and understanding the support that those learners need to make sure that they're able to access that, and also that it's building confidence and that it's moving at the right pace for them.
Sorry, Victoria, if a child goes into a lower stream because they haven't performed well in a SATs type test situation, you will be checking them later on though to see if they're in the right stream, wouldn't you?
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to pick up on that. So we don't have, we are mixed ability completely in our school, but in any case, every year, some students do particularly well in their SATs, and that might be quite unexpected, and other students underperform. And our job is to look at that data, and we do use it. We use it for target setting and things like that, but it isn't the be all and end all by any means. And actually, as soon as those students start, they're very much our students. We're tracking their progress. If we notice that a student needed more support or needed more challenge, we would be putting that in place regardless of what number they came with from primary school. And I think, as Isla said, we have a lot of contact with our primary schools, and not just about numbers. It's much more about the individual students. So particularly this year, if there have been any students who have really struggled and they're going to be joining us next year, that would be something that would certainly be picked up as part of the transition process.
So it's a much more holistic process.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's reassuring. Claire William, this is probably for you, Isla. My 9-year-old has started sneaking into my bed at night since starting back at school. How can I help her to adjust having to leave mummy every day?
Well, I'm really sorry to hear that your daughter's finding it difficult to adjust, and thank you for sharing, because I think it's something that many parents are experiencing and have similar challenges and are probably quite concerned as well. And actually on the podcast last night, there was some advice around this area, and one thing that really stood out to me was a reminder that actually this situation is new to all of us, and we're all finding our way through it, and it will take time to adjust. And the advice, and actually Victoria mentioned this earlier, so it's all sort of in line, was around re-establishing routines, listening to concerns, speaking with your children, and really building their confidence, and really supporting them to be in a place where they're happy to go back into school and ready to pick up learning. So there's lots of, I think, really focusing first on, on that sort of side, and making sure that they're sort of set up to learn by feeling secure going back to school.
I think that's lovely as well, because what you've said is absolutely right, isn't it? Is that I think people are almost frightened to talk about this sort of stuff, as though they're putting themselves or their child at a disadvantage, when it's incredibly common.
And it's something we're all sort of going through together and learning together. And at Pearson, we worked with an educational psychologist over the summer to create some free support guides for parents to help their children manage anxiety. We'll pop a link in the chat, but there's also a link in the free guide you can download. And there's some great sort of tips in there around things like managing anxiety around returning to school. So lots of tips and things for you to try, but also links if you do feel you need more support. And again, some of the advice in those booklets is around, if you're particularly concerned about your child, do speak to the school, let them know. And it's a case of them working together to make sure that child's getting the support they need to feel comfortable and happy being back at school. I
think that's something, Victoria, that people, again, parents, particularly if they're new, they're coming into secondary for the first time, they don't realise that actually you want us to talk to you and say, we're having a rough time at the moment, what can we do?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a common, when parents, particularly when they move from year 6 into year 7, secondary schools can feel like a bit of a black hole. actually, because they are much larger. As we were saying earlier, the children are interacting with lots more members of staff. So I think actually establishing that contact with like a form tutor is really, really helpful, because it means that you've just got that point of contact and somebody to drop an email to if you're a little bit worried about your child. And we would always encourage parents to do that earlier rather than later. Much better for us to know that there's been a slight problem and to put something in place to support a child and fix things, than to let that escalate and to get worse and worse, and then for it to need a much greater intervention. And there are a whole range of things that we can do to support students' wellbeing, both in college, but then we also have lots of outside agencies that we work with, much like Isla has said, that can help. And it's just a question of asking for that help, which is often the hardest bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Going on to another question, Emma says, this one's for you, Victoria, first. My son finds writing hard. I'm worried that he'll be expected to write more in less time. Now he is in year 7, yet after a term and a half of online lessons and computer-based work, just won't be prepared.
Yeah, again, it's a really common worry, this. Like we said before, it's worth bearing in mind, obviously everybody is in the same boat. All the students have been away and mostly been focusing on online learning. There will be more of an expectation, but the students will come to that quite gradually. It's not going to all of a sudden be the case that they're expected to write reams and reams more. It's also a very common thing with boys often, that boys are less keen on writing. That's something that teachers will be aware of and will be supporting students to overcome. But honestly, I think that it will be fine. I think really, there is no need to worry. The students have always had a little dip from year 6 into year 7 anyway. It's something that we're very mindful of because they've had the 6 weeks holidays. And I think genuinely in the mind of most secondary teachers, this is a kind of extension of that. And actually very quickly, students will get into new routines and they will be ready and raring to go.
Is that something you agree with, Isla? That you get this kind of slight dip, it's like a cliff edge, and then suddenly they're going to shoot up again.
Yeah, and it was one thing that I think back to school has got so much focus at the moment in the press and on TV and talking about learners going back, was actually this is what our schools do. This is what they're brilliant at. Our children come in, they work out what they need, and then they put those plans in place. And as Victoria was saying, each year with the summer, there's that sort of lag. Some children may have forgotten what they learned before, and they're not sort of used to being in that learning environment. So each year it's about coming back, sort of re-establishing that and sort of getting going again. So it's what our schools are brilliant at doing. It's just this is a sort of bigger emphasis. And we've got this year, and there's lots more questions, and we wouldn't normally ask these questions. We'd know all the schools sort of doing that. And I think it's but this is what our schools are brilliant at doing, I think. Ida Plesner says, what's the best way to enforce a constructive routine? So routines, Victoria, how good are they for when the children are getting into year 7?
Very good. And it's interesting, this one made me chuckle a little bit, because this is something I think that gets harder and harder as students go through secondary school. The notion of kind of enforcing a routine. Routine is hugely important. And I think it's true of year 7 students as true as it is of year 11 students, that actually if you involve them in creating the routine, it is likely to be much more constructive. Task them with sitting down with you to organise what that day is going to look like once they've got back from school. And I think also particularly making sure that you're building in time for them to do the things that they really enjoy. And that's true right when the students get up to doing their exams, that actually if it's going to be sustainable and constructive, then it needs to have some things in it that the child wants to do. Because with the best will in the world, you cannot make a student work from when they get home to when they go to bed without any free time, and actually that's not really good for them. So making sure that time is built in for fun, to do some things that they might want to do, some screen time, whatever it is that they enjoy, to actually have that downtime as part of that routine, and for them to be able to see that and to have some sort of ownership over it, particularly as they're getting more independent when they go to secondary school. if they can feel that they have contributed to building a routine, I think they're more likely to be agreeable to it than if they haven't.
And I mean, does that particularly fit something like sleep? It's making sure that bedtime is within a 15 or 20-minute window the same time every day, or does it actually have to be 5 minutes windows?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, a little bit of flexibility is good. Because it makes things easier to stick to. We all know that actually if we're a little bit more flexible with ourselves, we're much more likely to stick to something than if it's absolutely regimented. So I think having that flexibility is fine, but setting a sensible and possibly a bit of a compromise around bedtime so that the child feels that they've got some independence and they're allowed to be a little bit more grown up, but that they're getting plenty of sleep. That they're doing little things like packing their bag the night before and those kinds of things, because that often causes quite a lot of frustration and anxiety for parents, I think, particularly, but also for children who then might forget something at the last minute. Actually getting into the routine of, before they start getting ready for bed or when they finish their work, packing their bag and knowing that everything is ready for the next day is really helpful.
And that's actually one of those good practices for future life, isn't it? If you always get ready, then when you're an adult, you've still got.
I still do that now. It's the bag for me, the bag for my toddler, ready to go by the front door, everything ready, because it just makes that morning a little bit more bearable.
Yeah, definitely. This one's for you, Isla. Irfan Latif says public exams were cancelled this year, and teachers awarded their students their grades as CAGs. Will independent schools who do the 11 plus this time round follow suit? So will the 11 plus be a proper exam, or will it be assessed?
The 11 plus is an interesting one because it's an exam taken by some school pupils, but not everyone, in the last year primary school, and it is based on different areas have different requirements. And it's an exam to be able to sort of get into different schools. So a selective school. So the DfE has published guidance for state-funded schools governed by the School Admissions Code. So for those who do the 11 plus, and this guidance isn't targeted at independent schools, but within the guidance, they're suggesting it may be useful for independent schools as well. And again, there's a link, so we can share a link to this guidance for you to have a look at. And the DfE does make some recommendations in there around potentially delaying some of the exams a couple of months, but there are some challenges with doing that. So it wouldn't be right for me to speculate on what independent schools may or may not do here, but I would recommend having a look at the school's website and looking at the sort of local rules and processes in place around the 11 plus, because it is something that does vary by area.
And I suppose it's one of those things that, given we still, we just don't know where we are at the moment, there's going to be fluidity in this situation, isn't there? So you're going to need to keep in touch with the schools that you're interested in.
Potentially, and I think that's probably the sort of best practice here, where it may change, there may be different rules, just to make sure that you're sort of in touch with those schools and able to get the latest information.
Yeah. So Susanna Chambers says, and I think this is for you, Isla, how can parents or carers get involved in family learning courses to more sustainably support their child's learning and development, both during and beyond the pandemic?
I love this one. I think it's a great question, because I know I certainly found my new role as educator very daunting this year. So I think it's a great sort of idea and brilliant to want to sort of think, okay, how can we sort of be more involved? But my first thing to suggest would be to speak with your child's school to see what support they may have available. And it's really interesting to hear Victoria sort of speaking earlier about the role of the school, and that it's the school sees it as it's their role to make sure that the children are learning, and great to have support at home, but actually that's not it's not on parents to be doing that. I'd say as well that the schools I'm speaking to, a lot they're planning for disruption this year already. So some, unfortunately, are seeing some children being off if they're self-isolating. So a lot of sort of planning for a scenario where they may have learners in and out of school, and just making sure there's some support in place to really help families if they're sort of back at home doing things at home. So just an example, my son's school, so he's reception, so a different age, but they used an app while the children were off before with some activities on there. So they've asked us all to download the app, and they've been setting some activities on there for us to practice, so we're sort of used to it. And actually, when I sat down to do an activity with him, he knew all the tools and how to use it. So they've been using it in class as well, just to sort of start practicing and thinking about different ways of being able to access content. And many of the schools I'm speaking to talk about blended learning, and it's a term we're sort of seeing, one that we're using as well. And we're using that to refer to the sort of what you do in class, and then the seamless transition to what you're doing at home. So schools very much starting to plan and think about topics or areas and things that can be approached in school and what's most effective in school. And then as part of that, what can be followed up at home, and whether that's practicing the content that's been learnt in school or whether that's sort of new content, and thinking about what sort of works best in those different learning environments. And again, with being consistent across the two, so having that sort of information and that you know how to approach some of these things.
I think that sort of leads us on to the next question, which again is 11 plus based. So Isla, preparation time for 11 plus exams. If we've already got a busy schedule, we've got our homework, we've got our dinner, our bath, we're not even doing clubs, or sorry, we are doing clubs, sorry, we're a number of clubs. How do you then add the extra learning in and the extra practice for 11 plus? Because I know parents get really anxious that, you know, everybody else is having hours and hours of tutoring and my child isn't. How do you do it?
Yeah, no, I completely understand how challenging it is to sort of fit in sort of additional practice or anything extra around the sort of busy schedules. And again, so I'd sort of share that same advice about talking to the school and sort of speaking to them about the sort of work that your child's already having. So if there's lots of homework and they're struggling to fit that in anyway, it'd be worth speaking to their teacher and finding out, or sort of sharing that information and seeing if there's different things that you can do or different ways the school could support. In terms of 11 plus, I think it is a sort of tricky one, and as I said, it's one that not everyone sort of does. But I think building confidence is really important here, and ways of doing that could be about incorporating some practice resources online, or perhaps it might be good to think about how you could incorporate practice into other activities you're already doing. So for example, vocabulary is an important sort of area, and so encouraging reading more generally is going to help with vocabulary and can help with preparation, and it can also help with building confidence. So maybe sort of thinking about how else it can fit in. And again, it sort of really resonates with me, the sort of advice from Victoria earlier about finding that balance and making sure that there is some downtime and there is some time to do other things as well, and it's not all sort of focused on school or learning.
Yeah. And actually my top tip, Fatima, and for anyone else who's worrying about this, is don't listen to the other parents when they tell you their child is working day and night and also doing 3 hours of violin and karate, and they're not doing it all. Nobody can do it all. There aren't enough hours in the day. So don't let yourself get frightened by other parents sort of panicking.
Yeah, I think other parents could be a great source of help and sort of tips and advice, but also a source of worry if you're sort of comparing. And again, having just joined that sort of family of having a child at school, I'm conscious of, oh, did I do my label as well, and all of that sort of thing. So
we all know parenting is horribly competitive at times, even when you don't mean it to be. So definitely don't get yourself scared off, or pushed into something that's too much. Gina Parker says, how do we decrease generalized anxiety and increase the appetite for learning? Victoria, what do you feel about that?
So I think it's about trying to find the positives. So really try to look for the things that your child's enjoying at school. Make sure that you're asking them every day, you know, what's gone well today, and encourage them to actually find the things that they're enjoying. And again, I think it comes back to this idea of making sure that we're focusing on more than just academic work, and making sure that we're encouraging our children to take part in clubs and other activities, because actually if the relationship with school is not that great, finding something that they really enjoy that might be a small part of school life can actually really help transform their experience and build that bond with a particular teacher or with a particular subject area that they might not have had before. And I think it makes those other things become, in the short term, a little bit more bearable, but B, in the long term, it can help to really kind of help them to discover that love of learning again. And secondary school is a really great time to do that, because there are so many new opportunities and so many new subjects that actually we can really harness that in year 7. Then it is fantastic.
Yeah.
I think that's great, because we do want our children to enjoy learning, don't we? And learning should be fun, and we want them to really enjoy it. And actually, we did speak a bit about that last night as well. And in line with what you said, Victoria, the conversation there was around giving feedback on behaviour and effort rather than outcomes, to really motivate and build confidence in children. And again, we've touched on it today, but I think that the language we're using is really important as well. So rather than talking about catching up and learning gaps, just think about really positive language around the progress and around being back in school and sort of learning and being able to apply to real life context, and to think about that sort of thing.
I mean, I think it staggers all of us as parents, and I'm sure the teachers too, is that the children just seem to be just getting on with it. I mean, with my own family, I don't see actually any heart-rending gaps coming up. They're not looking at what they don't know. They're simply approaching the new set of work with open arms and saying, okay, this is what I'm going to learn now. And I think we're the ones who are worried about the gaps much more than our children.
And I think we've been really, really clear with our teachers about the importance of that, and about really focusing on the year ahead. And, this is what we're going to be helping you to do this year, rather than going in where they might be quite worried about the time that's been missed and the things that they wanted students to learn that they hadn't, and actually just focusing on that positive message all the time. And I think that has had a really positive impact too.
It's really is good. Richard Evans says, should I pay for additional tuition for my year 6 son? Now, he hasn't said whether he's aiming at 11 plus. I'm going to assume so. What do you think, Isla? Is it worth paying for private tuition?
Well, I think decisions around things like private tutoring are really personal ones and depend on individual circumstances. So I wouldn't be able to advise but I think if you're thinking about tutoring because you have any concerns or are worried that your child needs additional support in a particular area, I'd recommend speaking to their teacher and to find out if there's additional support at school, or what you feel that sort of need is. And there are other options as well for those who may not be in a position to pay for additional tuition. So, for example, providers like us at Pearson have a range of free and paid for resources. So lots of different resources available to support. Again, I think personal circumstances and depending on what that sort of need is, that do pick up with the school as well.
It's interesting, because Katrina Herity has also said she wants to find a good private tutor, not a computer-based learning program, because one of her daughters has become behind due to health issues, and is already very anxious about catching up and panicking. She's got another. She hasn't said that the 2 children, 11 and 8, and the parents, they're worried about the effect of non-effective education for a long time. I think that they absolutely, she's absolutely speaking for so many parents, that they've just got this, horrible fear that somehow the pandemic has let everybody down and they're just desperate to do something about it. So, I mean, would you suggest, Victoria, in those circumstances where maybe health has been a factor, not just the pandemic, would you suggest having a bit of extra help when they come into year 7, or is it the school can cope?
We don't. We would never encourage our families to look at private tuition, and I think that's partly because of the ethos of our particular school and the setting that we work in. But actually, I would really, really strongly encourage the parents to get in contact with the school and talk about the worries that they have. As we've said quite a few times tonight, actually, I think people have really overestimated the impact of the time that has been missed. Everybody is in the same boat. People are anxious about it, but genuinely, I think as a school leader, I genuinely think it is going to be okay. I'm not worried about the time that the students have missed. I know that now they're back in college, they are in a really great place, and they have excellent teachers, and I am sure that is the case for all of the parents that are with us this evening. And I would say, contact the school if you're worried, but don't rush into anything. Let the children just settle back into school, for the next few weeks, get some feedback. This has been a relatively short period in terms of a whole school career. It will be okay.
Yeah, I think that's really reassuring. Are there any curriculum subject categories that should be prioritised over the next academic year, says Teresa?
So I think be guided by the school. So when you start to get feedback from the school, be that through like marked work or be that through progress reports, that will help you to identify whether there are any areas that your child needs to focus on. And I think if you don't want to wait that long, then it would be worth contacting the school to find out if there are any particular things that you can be working on. But again, I think focusing on settling in, getting into a really good routine are the priorities rather than worrying about gaps.
Okay. And Stefan says, how can students develop a growth mindset and stronger resilience during the COVID-19 pandemic? Isla, I know we talked about this last night as well, I think. Do you want to address that first? Getting the resilience side of things.
Yeah, again, I think I'd recommend the link to the resources that I've shared in our sort of guide. We've got lots of sort of tips in there. And I think part of it is about building up that confidence and really focusing on what children can do and what they have learnt rather than what they haven't. And there are some still real practical applications of this in school, which I don't know, Victoria, you might be sort of better placed to give sort of examples of. But I think it's around that confidence building and that real sort of empowerment of what you can do and where your education can take you.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with that completely. And I think it's about taking each day as it comes, looking for those positives at the end of every day, talking about things that maybe haven't gone so well and thinking about how they could be done differently or how we can learn from those experiences. That's something that we do a lot as part of our tutor program, into like our form time program, essentially, because we find that's one of the things that students find hardest. And I think if we can equip them well to deal with failure and things that don't go so well, then actually they will fly.
Yeah. I've just noticed we are drawing to a close, actually. So before we go, I've noticed we've got a question here from Lois that's come up on the chat. Lois says, thank you for this session. No, thank you for coming, Lois. Can you give an idea as to what proportion of pupils around year 6 were actually homeschooled during lockdown? Do we have any idea about that?
I don't think we'll have sort of data. I think there's lots of schools will have insights for their own school and for their own and schools they're in contact with around what they're doing. But I haven't seen sort of full figures. I think the EEF publishes quite a lot of data, so we can have a look on there and see if there's any sort of links we can share. But I haven't seen the sort of full sort of picture. I'm not sure we'd be able to.
I mean, my sort of anecdotal experience is that all the schools have been trying, and it seems like most people have been trying to get their children around this age, some level of homeschooling. Is that something that you would agree with, Victoria?
Yeah, I think so. And I guess it depends a little bit what we mean by the idea of homeschooling, because I wasn't sure. I interpreted that question as to how many students were going into school versus how many were staying at home. I think all schools provided some form of remote learning. I mean, clearly that was variable in quality, but home learning was provided for everybody. Or certainly should have been.
And a lot of children actually did go into school. I mean, all the children from key workers and it's surprisingly quite a high number of children actually.
Yeah, we did. We were open every single day except for one of the bank holidays over Easter. We opened every day from the lockdown to the very end of the summer term throughout all the holidays. So.
One thing that's really come through from my conversations with schools is that they're prepared for and ready for learners to have had lots of different experiences and approaching it through a sort of lens of understanding where each learner is to make sure they're getting the right support to progress. And actually we did have a sort of question before we've not been able to get to, but around well, actually those who did manage to learn lots and who've really progressed and have really moved forward, what support's in place for them to make sure that they're not sort of held back if others are in that sort of scenario. But I think we sort of mentioned earlier around the stretch and challenge as well, and part of those sort of tests and assessments in schools to understand where learners are is also about making sure they can progress and be given additional support and keep them motivated to keep learning if they have been able to sort of move forwards while schools have been closed.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's something that we've done a lot of since September, is diagnostic testing is what we would refer to it as. So working out exactly where students are so that we know where we've got gaps that we need to support them with, but also where students have really engaged, actually being able to provide them with some extra challenge to make sure that they're not just sat waiting for everybody else to catch up.
Well, thank you both so much. I know we've come to the end of our session. Thank you, Victoria. Thank you, Isla. And thank you to everyone at home for joining us again.